It's okay, Philip.
Very good. Any other noise coming through from thunder and lightning?
Yes, you can hear some of it. Yeah, sure. And sometimes the
good.
sound is a little distorted, but I
Yeah.
think it's, the connection. But
I'm not
it's
surprised.
yeah, sure.
A lot of lightning about.
Yes.
Jupiter is really in action tonight, hurling his thunderbolts. So now this webinar is going to be basically mainly taken from the latest newsletter, Sagittarius, which some of you may have read already. But we can get into a little deeper in the webinar, and we can ask questions and so forth, clarify things that you may not have understood reading. And of course, this ninth labor of Hercules is taken from the ninth sign of the ninth gate of Sagittarius, and 9 is the number of initiation. You'll notice that the glyph for 9, the number, the actual numeral, starts at ground level, as it were, and rises up from matter into spirit. And 6, of course, is the opposite, where it's this descent of spirit into matter. Anyway, Sagittarius is the ninth gate, the ninth labor of Hercules, the world initiate of ancient times, who was tested in all 12 signs upon his final path to liberation. And the Tibetan makes a comment about this in esoteric astrology. He says, upon the path of discipleship and the path of initiation, he is subjected during the final stages of the path to exactly 12 incarnations, passing one in each of the 12 signs. In them, he has to prove himself, attaining great moments of crisis in each of the constellations of the fixed cross in particular. Fixed cross is where the first, second, and third initiations are taken. From point to point, stage to stage, and finally cross to cross, he fights for his spiritual life in all the 12 houses and all the 12 constellations, subjected to countless combinations of forces and energies, ray, planetary, zodiacal, and cosmic, until he is made anew, becomes the new man, is sensitive to the entire range of spiritual vibrations in our solar system, and has achieved that detachment which will enable him to escape from the wheel of rebirth. So Hercules was an initiate of ancient times, and the Tibetan in the blue books does compare him to the Christ and the Buddha. He cites those 3 figures as important ones in our planetary evolution, standing for different things, of course. So, so having emerged triumphant from the previous sign of Scorpio, which we know is a sign of initiation, where Hercules defeats the hissing 9-headed Hydra in the stinking swamp of Linnea, in Sagittarius, Hercules presses on through similar country, the fetid marshes of Stymphalis, where dwell the birds that wreak havoc. And so, and hence Sagittarius is sometimes being called the sign of the effect of Scorpio. The moment we have freed ourselves from illusion, that moment we enter into Sagittarius and we see the goal. So Hercules' teacher, who sends him out on each of these 12 missions, enjoins him to find a way to flush them from their long, secure abode, adding, the flame that gleams beyond the mind reveals direction sure. And of course, he's talking about the intuition here, which emanates from the plane of Buddhi, direct knowledge beyond the mental plane. So this is just one rendition, this photograph, or this painting, I should say, of Hercules confronting the Stymphalian birds. And you can see their feathers are like steel shafts, apparently. And he's ringing a bell here. So ultimately, he uses a pair of cymbals to scare the birds away in the myth as depicted by the Tibetan. But in other traditions, you have other instruments that he uses. But essentially, he overwhelms the screeching birds with a louder sound. So Sagittarius is a sound of silence and it's a sound of noise. I mean, Sagittarians themselves can be quite loud in themselves. Can talk very, just getting another big roll of thunder above me here right now. I can hardly hear myself. So we have the Sagittarius can be quite boisterous and noisy, and yet Sagittarius at the higher level is the sound of silence and the hermit in his cave meditating. The Tibetan says joyfulness takes the place of criticism, that creator of misery, and is the silence that sounds. It can only be understood through a life dedicated to the newer rhythms and service to the whole. Then that sounding joy and that joyful sounding can make its true meaning felt. Serenity is based upon spiritual understanding. It is not an astral condition, but a soul reaction. A discriminating point he makes there. The peace that lies ahead for humanity is the peace of serenity and joy, a serenity based upon spiritual understanding. These two qualities of the soul, serenity and joy, are the indications that the soul, the one who stands alone, is controlling the personality, circumstance, and all environing conditions of life. Now, I'm just going to rearrange this box here on my screen. I can't see the chat thing at the moment. Just a moment. We'll rearrange this to another. I can't see if there are any questions or not. Oh, here we go. Chat. No, it's empty. Very good. Are there any questions or comments so far? All right. So as we know, sound is both a building and destroying agency, depending on how it's used. The ancient mantras that have been created emerged from the realm of the abstract mind, where philosophical thought reigns supreme. And this is why Sagittarius is the sign of religion and philosophy. The archer's arrow, of course, pierces the cloud of thought, the rain cloud of knowable things. It contains the divine blueprint of all universal ideas. And similarly, the archer unleashes the arrow of thought and waits the returning arrow of the intuition. Sagittarius is the sign of questing. The philosopher, as we have here, this painting of Rurik, of an Oriental man somewhere in the Himalayas, in his basic robe, and an ascetic wandering and thinking. And in the higher realms of thought, if you like, the rarefied atmosphere of the high mountains. And that's why you get a lot of saints and philosophers and so forth who crave the quietness of the mountains or the deserts, solitude, to think, to connect with the divine. So Hercules achieved success, overwhelming the raucous chorus by creating an even greater dissonance. And here's the paradox, because Sagittarius is, as I said before, traditionally regarded as a sign of silence. recalling the ancient mystery schools where the new applicant was not allowed to talk but to watch and work. This is, for instance, the ancient school of Pythagoras, who was a previous incarnation of the Master Kuthumi, where applicants to the school had to maintain silence for 2 years, I think it was. Silence is also needed at times in the work of the ageless wisdom in refraining from saying things that others may not be ready to hear or understand. And that is certainly the case with some of the Bailey teachings that have been criticized by people who are really not ready for them yet. When Jesus stood in silence, refusing to respond to accusations from his persecutors, he was not going to engage with the crystallized separative thought of the old religion and cultural practices. So he was silent as he was sentenced in that kangaroo court, essentially. So the lesson of Sagittarius is restraint of speech through control of thought. Not an easy task for oft-times indiscreet Sagittarius that can be loud and fall into the gossip trap, which is symbolized by the opposite sign Gemini. Note that the word discreet is linked to discrimination, a quality of Virgo, a sign that shares the mutable cross with often undiscriminating Sagittarius. In fact, when we look at the mutable cross, we always, with any sign, we consider all 4 signs of the mutable cross, particularly the polar opposite. Gemini Sagittarius is both signs known for lack of discrimination. Virgo is the sign of discrimination. And Pisces can be undiscriminating as well. So Virgo is the main discriminating factor in the mutable cross signs. So it doesn't mean to say if you are Sagittarius, you're not discriminating. It all depends on the stage of soul unfoldment and what signs of the cross that you're on that you're invoking, bringing into play. Still no questions or comments so far? Very good. So this Gemini Sagittarius axis, Sagittarius is regarded as a sign of truth, while its opposite sign, Gemini, can be a sign of deception, brought about by the distortions which take place through the manifestation of ideas from higher mind to lower mind. Lower mind being part of the imperfect personality. Yet a reversal of these roles too. Gemini searches for the truth via the facts, and Sagittarius can deceive itself through blinded idealism or the illusory habitation of an ivory tower of thought. Either way, this axis is about truth and deception, unconscious or conscious, yet it aspires to truth's illumined expression through speech and communication. Of course, Gemini is the sign of speech, the main sign of speech and communication. Sagittarius is perhaps more about silent communication, telepathy, for instance, sending the arrow of thought, as it were. Yet both signs, Gemini and Sagittarius, are intuitive and connected to the heart center. Sagittarius via its ruler Jupiter, which rules the heart, and Gemini through its rulership over the heart's endocrine gland, the thymus, and also the fact that the only ray to pass through Gemini is the Jupiter-ruled second ray of love wisdom. So very interesting dynamics there with those 2 opposite signs. All right. Before we move on, I invite you again to ask any questions or make any comments so far. You're very quiet lot tonight. Okay. Well, you're exercising the Sagittarian silence. So let's go on to this part about music and mantrams. Language clothes thought. Hence, language is sacred as it brings divine ideas and archetypes into correct expression. And languages can be words and mantrams, of course, or art or music. There are many languages. There's the language of love. Mercury, as the ruler of Gemini, verbalizes higher thought, whilst Mercury ruled Virgo writes down the language or crafts the art. There's some amazing relationships between here, which some of you may be familiar with in my writings. I've written about quite extensively. Beethoven was always open to divine sounds from on high, translating them into earthly music, eventually becoming deaf to physical sounds. He had Sun, Moon, and Mercury in Sagittarius, with Mercury opposing Mars in Gemini. He was a pretty feisty kind of guy too. He didn't suffer fools gladly, and he mocked the kings and queens who showered him with money. And so quite a paradox there, becoming deaf to the physical sounds, but of course opening himself up to the greater Nada Brahma, as it's called in the Hindu tradition, the silent sounds or the celestial music, you could say, and then translating it into earthly music. There's a good movie about him. I can't remember who's, I saw it about 20 years ago, I think. It's probably a few movies now. But quite a good story about his life. And that, of course, is the way to understand astrology. You study the charts of yourself, your family, your near and dear ones, and famous people, initiates and disciples in history. So just as this Sagittarian archer releases the arrow, so this sign also stands for the spontaneous release of the Om in meditation, the divine sound that affirms the soul and is the start of the mantra, of course, Om Mani Padme Hum, which means I am the jewel and the heart of the lotus. And the Tibetan monks chant it constantly. Or, as St. John once affirmed, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was created through sound, through the formulation of a complex mantra that is still being sounded by the Logos, or the planetary Logos, and the solar Logos, all the Logi, actually, or God. The planetary Logos being our local God. And Blavatsky gives a great big long word in the Secret Doctrine of what that or an approximation probably of what that word is, that's still being sounded and still forming the worlds, as it were. It's still keeping this planet together, so to speak. So the human mantrams that we use are a chip off the old block, as they say, is a spark off the original flame. That's a smaller sound that's part of the greater sound, so to speak. So this other passage here from the Tibetan, the sound which was the first indication of the activity of the planetary Logos is not a word, but a full reverberating sound, holding within itself all other sounds, all chords, and certain musical tones, which have been given the name of the music of the spheres, and dissonances unknown as yet to the modern ear. It is this sound which the rising one must learn to recognize, and to which he must respond not only by means of the sense of hearing and its higher correspondences, but through a response from every part and every aspect of the form nature in the three worlds. So some very rich and deep passages here to reflect upon. Catherine says, copying Beethoven is a good movie which shows his character and captures the essence of the Ninth Symphony played by Ed Harris. I don't think I've seen that one. Sounds great. Thanks, Catherine. Catherine herself is a musician and a great singer, by the way. As I recall, listening to some of her music at conferences. So welcome, Catherine from New Zealand. And anyone else like to comment on anything? Because I don't have any other material besides this. I was banking on a good conversation tonight. So questions are invited. I mean, I can talk about a lot of things, obviously, but I want more of a dialogue here. We can extend that. Well, some of you may know of the famous story of Don Cervantes, who tilts at windmills. This is a classic Sagittarian archetype. And I wrote a newsletter several years ago featuring Don Cervantes, I should say, the Spanish philosopher. And he's a good example of Sagittarius on many levels. First of all, he's riding a horse. So there is the horses are ruled by Sagittarius, and of course the half man, half horse is Sagittarius, the centaur. And secondly, he's got a long lance or spear that he carries with him. He's a jousting knight, so to speak. He's a knight on the quest, and the quest is all about Sagittarius. And he has his sidekick, his companion. Oh, what's his name? I can't remember it now. Is it not Pedro? A name like that, I think. Who is his grounding factor, because Sagittarius can be so up in the clouds of abstract thought. Pancho, thank you, Hugh. Poncho. Sagittarius can be so high up in the high flights of thought, up in the clouds of thought, Pancho Sanchez, thank you, that they lose themselves in thought, and in fact don't even attend to the needs of the physical body, such as washing or eating. That's the most extreme. And Pancho is the grounding factor of as a simple man who is not a philosopher, but who is a great team for Don Cervantes. Don Quixote. Don Cervantes, Don Quixote. Gisele says, I have a few versions and seen even the musical in Stratford in Ontario. Sounds very rich. Yes. And that's just one aspect of a very rich story. The tilting at windmills. So he imagined, this is the phrase that comes from him charging a windmill. So it's about the imagination. Sagittarius is a very intuitive sign. And it's also about unrealistic expectations that Sagittarians can create in terms of reaching beyond your means. That's why I call Sagittarius Exaggitarius, because they can tend to bite off more than they can chew, promise more than they can deliver, and not follow through to completion, not follow the arrow through to the target that they've released. They can get caught up in the Gemini polarity of busyness and many unfinished projects, not followed through upon. So, and this is also related to the expansive capacity of Sagittarius' ruler, Jupiter. Jupiter, the planet of love, wisdom, the gigantic, the biggest planet in the solar system. And quite often Sagittarians are gigantic. They're quite tall, or big, not necessarily skinny, but usually skinny and tall. That can be quite big and round too. But just this sense of largeness. I'm thinking of John Goodman, the actor who played Jupiter in a movie. Oh, gee, what's that one? Testing my memory tonight. Oh, someone will know it. But anyway, he played an excellent Jupiter that was just this overbearing. Sagittarians can be overbearing, larger than life character. Sagittarius was also a great storyteller. It takes three main rays through it: the fourth ray of harmony through conflict, as I mentioned in my newsletter, the fifth ray of science, and the sixth ray of devotion and idealism, which in fact finds its strongest expression through Sagittarius in this cycle. Hence the tendency for Sagittarius to be a fanatic, a religious fanatic, with an emotional adherence to ideas that creates fundamentalism and fanaticism. And having that one pointed, like horse blinkers, that they don't see anything else. It's just the target. So they can be very one-pointed, like the Zen archer aiming towards the target, but they can be also paradoxically so narrow-pointed that they don't see the bigger picture, which Sagittarius quite often represents. So many paradoxes with Sagittarius, and of course, the polarity Gemini. Hope the sound is okay because I can barely hear myself above the rain. So where was I? Yeah, we're talking about the three rays coming through Sagittarius. Great, thank you, Catherine, you can hear me. The fourth ray of harmony through conflict, also called the ray of art, beauty, and music. And you could add poetry to that as well, or lyrics, or storytelling. I think the fourth ray is the storyteller par excellence, and Sagittarius is a great storyteller because of its ability to be colorful, to weave in so many colorful elements into the story that may not necessarily be true, but they make a darn good yarn. This is the quality of is the kind of freewheeling, happy-go-lucky quality of Sagittarius. Jupiter is jolly, gigantic, jovial, all these J words that you have with this. In fact, his ancient name was Jove. That's where jovial comes from. So a very positive outlook that Sagittarians can have on life. And quite often, as per the ancient myths of the carousing centaurs who get drunk on various barrels of wine, Sagittarius is the party animal par excellence. He likes to party hearty and turn up the volume up to 10 on the stereo. Back at the house party after the pub is closed. There is, and that's a typical thing in Australia actually, which has strong Sagittarius in their horoscope, and also the USA. So with regard to Yeah, Catherine's asking any countries ruled by Sagittarius. Yeah, there are. I'll get to that in a second. I'm just going to mention the fifth ray of science, which I commented upon in the newsletter with regard to Brazil and the Sagittarius Gemini axis, and also to something else. I can't remember what it was now. A lot has happened in the last week, but Sagittarius is unique in creating various triangles with other signs, such as the Sagittarius Aquarius Leo triangle for the fifth ray, which is a strong triangle in Brazil's horoscope at the moment. Sagittarius and Taurus Scorpio is another triangle for the fourth ray. And Taurus Scorpio, of course, are both very creative signs with regard to that fourth ray expression. So that fourth ray triangle would have been working strongly in Beethoven's chart, I expect. Yes, I mentioned in the newsletter, there's a little section on countries. Washington, D.C. is ruled by Sagittarius. And of course, the USA's horoscope, exoteric horoscope of 1776, is Sagittarius. And I point out that Sagittarius, or the Sagitta, the arrows, are featured on the US $1 bill. And of course, the eagle is another symbol of Sagittarius. It's also a symbol of Scorpio, but it is with its feathers, which are used for the arrow flights, is associated with Sagittarius. And of course, the flight of the arrow, the flight of the eagle, the soaring upwards. This is the energy of Sagittarius, the soaring upwards of thought, and hence flight in birds. Italy is a Sagittarius soul, I think. And Spain is a Sagittarius personality, or vice versa for both of those. Sagittarius is the sign of, as I said, of religious fanaticism. And both those countries are Catholic and were prominent in the Inquisition, which happened during the Piscean Age. I point out in the newsletter again, I think, where Sagittarius ruled the particular portion of time when the Inquisition was at its height in Europe over a couple of centuries. When you have a 2,160 years cycle, you can divide it into 12 times 12 times 160 or something like that, or a bit more, 180, I think it is. Yeah, 12 times 180. And so the 180-degree period, the Sagittarian period, fell right across that inquisitional period in Europe, where thousands of people were burnt as heretics or witches and so forth. So there is the fanaticism. Also, of course, the sixth ray is strong in both those countries. Italy is the sixth ray soul, and Spain is a sixth ray personality. And hence there would have been a lot of interaction between those countries then too, of course. There are other ones. I can't think which they are right now. So, any other comments or questions before we move on? So, when we consider Sagittarius, the ninth sign, it gives its meaning to the ninth house, which is the area of life experience pertaining to higher education, higher thought, philosophy, religion, the ageless wisdom, metaphysics, long journeys to foreign countries that expand the consciousness through contact with foreign cultures, all those kind of things. And so the philosophical ideas that are contacted through meditation, through prayer, through higher thought, and so forth, are codified into laws in the following sign of Capricorn. Capricorn is the law, ruled by Saturn, the lord of karma. He rules over that law. And so Capricorn represents the state, has those laws codified that people live by. And those laws, of course, are rough approximations of the universal laws. Some of them are more aligned than others, of course. So you have Capricorn, the 10th sign, the 10th house, representing achievement, the state, the status quo. That's where status comes from. Things as they are. And of course, the following sign, Aquarius, is a sign of the rebel, the revolutionary, who seeks to overturn the status quo that has become totally crystallized. Again, there's such a din going on here, I can hardly hear myself. It's great timing. It hasn't been like this all day, but tonight. So I will stay on track and try not to get distracted, however. So again, we can see so many stories in the zodiac. If we look at the opposite sign to Capricorn, it's Cancer. Cancer is the family unit. And there are many family units that make up the state. Cancer is the mother, Capricorn's the father, and so forth and so on. So there are quite a few Sagittarian personalities around. I've done a lot of profiles on Donald Trump in the last 5 years. I believe I'm really in the middle of a storm here. Who is a Gemini, born on the full moon of Gemini, so he has the moon in Sagittarius. Here's a classic example of the sun and moon in Sagittarius. That polarity. Now, what degree is it tonight? It's about 16 degrees Gemini Sag, and we have a very interesting conjunction of Mars in Gemini, conjunct the moon today. And I do comment on this with regard to what's unfolding in Brazil. We're probably going to see martial law coming in the next couple of days. It hasn't gone mainstream yet, but it's being prepared behind the scenes very quietly in many ways. And of course, the USA has Mars and Gemini. USA is a Sagittarius rising with Mars and Gemini opposite. And I've talked at length in my writings over the last 20 years about the problematic nature of Mars and Gemini and its aggressiveness and its wiliness. It's wily like the fox, Mars and Gemini. So we're having this transit of Mars for an almost unprecedented 7 months in going through Gemini, activating the Sagittarian polarity, particularly in Brazil's chart, for instance. And I discussed that in the newsletter if you want to read that in more detail. Hugh is saying here, retrograde Mars will be exactly conjunct Moon at the moment of the full moon tonight. I do mention this in the newsletter. If you read it, you can see my comments about that. And of course, any full moon pattern will stay etched in the etheric ethers for some months or even longer if it's an eclipse or something like that. And so this pattern will be powerful and is in fact within orb of USA's Mars and Gemini by about 4 or 5 degrees, I think. In fact, it is opposite. It straddles very closely the ascendant-descendant axis of USA's chart, which is, of course, going through its Pluto return at the moment. First ever Pluto return. So this full moon with Mars conjunct the descendant, the 7th house of relationships, is very significant, because that Mars in the 7th house is about USA's constant interference in other countries' affairs, which I've also written about at length, of course. So the Sagittarian polarity has a great opportunity to come into focus from this full moon, and that may take place in the next few months, but like getting a clearer vision, a one-pointed vision of the target, but not a fanatical vision, hopefully. Catherine says the hierarchical ruler being the Earth, there's been a lot of Earth activity with earthquakes and volcanoes in the South Pacific this month. Yes, I guess living in New Zealand, you'd be more aware of that than anyone, Catherine, as there would be tsunami alerts and so forth. When I lived in New Zealand, which is a Gemini Sol, I experienced about 11 tremors when I was living in Palmerston North, and that's quite something to experience, to see the house moving around above you. But so New Zealand, in fact, has an interesting mutable cross Gemini, Sol, Virgo personality, and the Prime Minister, Ardern, is a Sagittarian. So she is a good example, dare I say, of a fanatic. And someone who is a real questing for an ideal, but may be well blinded by idealism. Enough said there, I don't want to get political too much, but I have got a profile. If you go to my website, you can find a profile, a couple of profiles, in fact, on Jacinda Ardern. So, and as a leader, she captured the imagination through the espousal of her Sagittarian ideals at that time, several years ago. Not so much now, but anyway. Anyone else? So Sagittarius is the devotee on the path. With that 6th ray of devotion and idealism coming through it, you can see how it conditions so much of the Sagittarian energy. When you first discover esoteric astrology, you realize that the rays are the missing part that describe the signs in many ways, or qualify the signs in many ways. So you have the ascetic who has basically his robe, begging bowl, sandals or bare feet, staff, on the quest through the mountains or the desert, in caves, meditating, reflecting, contacting the inner world of meaning, and of course the soul and the group soul of which one is a part. And so in the last 1,000 years, we're told by the Tibetan that many of us who tread the path today have been in monasteries in both the East and the West, and have developed through retreat, prayer, and meditation the qualities of soul contact, and have stepped onto the path, or stepped further on, or more deeply onto the path. And Yet today, many of those souls find themselves in the big cities of the world, in the noise, and yet try to maintain that point of stillness. This is the key, really, is the spiral hurricane that you can see from space, and standing in the center of that hurricane is that still spot that is calm and anchored in stillness. And that's what I've tried to do tonight, in fact, in the middle of this storm. And then I'd be distracted by all the din of rain and thunder and lightning. So, but it's a good symbol, and similarly, with any spiral like that, related to the weather. Spiral galaxies. It's interesting that, in fact, the center of the galaxy, or the galactic center, is supposed to be at 26 Sagittarius. Gisele, I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, says you're in the soundless eye of the hurricane there. Or someone, no, hang on, sorry, it was someone else. Hugh says, can you say something about the sound name that the initiate sounds forth from the planetary logos to? Is it a vibration or certain syllables? Well, it's the syllables that create the vibration, I guess. And yes, I'm in the soundless eye of the hurricane. And right now, there's the hurricane's moved away, so it's quiet. Giselle says, I am glad we can still focus in the big city. I am in Toronto, but no time today. Yes. The noise of big cities is funny. When I was writing this latest newsletter about noise and sound, I had to do 3 or 4 trips by train into Lisbon, which is one of the noisiest cities I've experienced, I think. You've got the sound of concrete saws and building and traffic and car horns. It really is quite a din. Next time I go in, I'm going to wear earplugs or stereo headphones. And if you're not used to it, it can really impact your subtle bodies, your etheric body, astral body, quite severely. But of course, most people in big cities are used to all those sudden noises and screeching sounds. They've learnt to tune them out, but they can literally feel like they're cutting through your etheric body. And in one of these trips, on one day of one of these trips, there was actually a train strike as well. So we had carriages in the train just packed, just jammed in like they have on those Japanese bullet trains. That was fun. So what astrological initiation does Prophet Elijah represent? Says Nick. Well, I think we talk about Elias or Elijah with regard to John the Baptist. If it's with regard to John the Baptist, because there was a good example there of reincarnation, possibly the 3rd degree, and John the Baptist being maybe even more. But I'm not quite sure. You'd have to qualify who Elijah was there. Catherine says, the moon and Mars will also be conjunct Regal, it seems, a prominent star. Yeah, Regal as part of the constellation just below Orion, yeah? So Sagittarius is associated with initiation. Of course, the science of initiation is a sub-science of esoteric astrology. The science of all sciences, as GK calls it. And that is because of the seeker upon the way is seeking the base of the mountain Capricorn. And Capricorn is the mountain of initiation. So this again is a great symbol of Sagittarius leading to Capricorn. And the climbing of that mountain, as hinted at in that painting we looked at of Joffre's at the beginning of this webinar, where the symbols of Capricorn are quite strong in that painting. The goat skin and the unicorn. So, and Sagittarius is a fire sign, and fire is a symbol of the mind. And through higher education, the expansion of mental capacity and consciousness takes place. Of course, on the upper three subplanes of the mental plane resides the causal body of the soul. The lower four subplanes of the concrete mind. So we have various aspects of mind, and but that's another story for another day. I think we can go into that. But suffice to say, Sagittarians' association with higher education, and of course that fifth ray connection as well. I mentioned before that triangle with Leo Aquarius. Someone was going to say something then. Okay. Sagittarius is also prominent in the charts of, well, I told you, storytellers. I was going to say comedians too. If anyone is familiar with the Scottish comedian Sir Billy Connolly, very funny guy, very fast mind, and essentially a storyteller, a colourful storyteller. And he came, in fact, he did a big tour of Australia. He came on one of those three-wheeled motorbikes, and did a series of TV shows on that were very good. And I always thought about that as his Sagittarius resonant with Australia's Sagittarius. Yeah, thank you, Hugh. As Jesus said, Elijah was born again as John the Baptist. John the Baptist is a kind of a Moya, Master Moya kind of figure who paved the way for Jesus, of course, and baptized Jesus in the Jordan. And I do give an example of this in a recent newsletter, I think, about this passage in the Bible being an example of reincarnation, where in fact Elijah was the previous incarnation of John the Baptist, and John the Baptist even makes a distinction, saying, "No, I'm not Elijah, but," or hinting at, "I was him," so to speak. Or someone does in the commentary. I've got that bit mangled up, but so a lot of the hierarchy were incarnate around that time. Of course, Jesus took the 4th degree initiation. The Christ took the 6th degree initiation. And John the Baptist and John the Beloved were reputedly the Master Moya and the Master Kuthumi. So 3rd or 4th degree initiates, I suspect. I suspect that Elijah was a 3rd degree initiate and John the Baptist a 4th degree initiate. The symbol of having your head cut off is related to the 4th degree, by the way. And Hugh says also similar to the Bab, 1844, precursor to the Baha'i faith and very first ray. Yeah, sure. Anyone else? So Sagittarius can be quite as a seeker of truth, it can be quite. Yes, I did mention Beethoven's Sagittarius Sun. I think as a seeker of truth, what was I going to say? Sorry. Oh, I got distracted. I'm sorry. It's this storm is unbelievable. It will probably completely subside when the webinar ends. Sagittarius is a seeker of truth. Seeks to pierce the veil of illusion with the arrow of truth. That was something that just occurred to me. And yet can get, as I said before, caught up in the lies and deception of the polar opposite Gemini. It will come back to me, whatever it was I was trying to think about just then. So how are we going for time anyway? Well, I think if there's no more comments or questions, I think we can wrap it up for the night. I'm very glad we're in we're so close to the full moon tonight. So for some of us, it'll be happening in our sleep. Others of us will still be awake when it happens, and you'll no doubt be involved in other meditations. So if there's nothing else, then I will hand it over to you, Natalia, for closing music, and see some of you tomorrow night on the regular class for the Thursday class for the Ageless Wisdom Mysteries. Okay, ciao. Blessings, everyone.
Oh.